So tell me, what's your conclusion on this? I mean, do you think that the FBI was essentially setting up or fabricating terrorism events to kind of boost the numbers and make itself look good in terms of all the terrorist prosecutions it was racking up?
Yeah, I mean, my argument boils down to there's a lot of money for counterterrorism and not a lot of terrorists going around. And so what ends up happening is, the FBI has $3 billion for counterterrorism operations. It's the largest part of its budget. It's more money than it receives for organized crime, for financial fraud, and it can't really spend $3 billion and say, hey, we looked around and we didn't find any terrorists. What happens is there's pressure built into the system for agents to come up with terrorism cases. They put pressure on their informants to come up with terrorism cases, or people who would want to be terrorists. And what ultimately happens is they find people who are willing to dial that phone that they believe is going to detonate the bomb, the bomb that the FBI ultimately provided. But the people that they're ultimately bringing in are on the fringes of U.S. Muslim communities, are mentally ill, sometimes financially desperate, and they're lured into plots by informants who have a direct financial incentive in their prosecution. They can make $100,000. In the Lodi case, for example, the informant made more than $200,000. And so they are going into communities thinking, well, if I can find someone who wants to get involved in an act of terrorism, I can make some money. And that creates a story that's as much about terrorism as it is about justice. And I think what's happened is we've created a real alienation between federal law enforcement and U.S. Muslim communities as a result of these operations. And we've also exaggerated the threat of Islamic terrorism within the United States, because so many of the terrorism cases you're hearing about do not involve people who on their own had the capacity to commit an act of terrorism, did not have access to weapons, but were perhaps mentally ill, were caught up by an informant, and the informant said, well, let's move on with this act of terrorism. And the informant, through the FBI, provides the bomb, provides the transportation, everything he needs. In fact, even in one case, the person couldn't even drive the car, and they had to give him driving lessons so that he could deliver the bomb ultimately. And so I think what this has ultimately shows is that there has been this exaggerated effect, in part because there's so much money in federal law enforcement for counterterrorism.